Emma Thompson stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above their bed. The soft whirring sound filled the quiet bedroom as her husband Daniel slept peacefully beside her. His gentle snores reminded her of their 5 years together, but lately those sounds had become a symbol of the growing distance between them. The moonlight filtered through the half-drawn curtains, painting shadows across their bedroom walls. Emma turned to look at Daniel's face, relaxed in sleep. He was still handsome with his strong jaw and the slight curl of his dark hair falling across his forehead. She remembered how those features had once made her heart race. Now she felt only a dull ache in her chest. Emma slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake him. She wrapped herself in her favorite blue robe and walked to the window. Their suburban neighborhood was quiet at this late hour. A few street lamps cast pools of yellow light on the empty road. The house next door had been vacant for months, but a sold sign had appeared last week. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window and closed her eyes. 5 years ago, when they had first married, Daniel had been attentive and loving. He would surprise her with small gifts, leave sweet notes in her lunch bag, and make time for weekend trips to the countryside. Their evenings had been filled with deep conversations and tender moments, but slowly, as Daniel climbed the ladder at his law firm, those moments became rare. Emma returned to bed and pulled the covers up to her chin. Their bedroom felt cold despite the warm spring night. She remembered how Daniel used to hold her close, his body warming hers, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her skin. Now they slept on opposite sides of the bed, an invisible wall between them. The next morning, Emma woke to an empty space beside her. On the nightstand was a hastily written note, "Early meeting, don't wait up tonight." She sighed and pressed the note to her chest. This had become their main form of communication, brief notes and quick text messages. Emma went through her morning routine mechanically. After a quick shower, she dressed in a light floral dress that Daniel had once said brought out the green in her eyes. He hadn't commented on her appearance in months. She brushed her honey blonde hair, applied minimal makeup, and headed downstairs. The kitchen was spotless, just as she had left it the night before. No coffee had been made, no toast crumbs on the counter. It was as if Daniel had never been there. Emma made herself a cup of tea and took it to the front porch. The morning air was fresh, carrying the scent of spring flowers from her garden. Emma taught literature at the local high school, but it was Saturday and the weekend stretched before her, empty and lonely. Daniel would be at the office all day, working on a big case. She had suggested they go to dinner tonight, to try a new restaurant in town, but his note made it clear that wouldn't happen. As she sipped her tea, Emma noticed movement next door. A moving truck had pulled up, and 2 men were unloading furniture. She watched with mild interest, grateful for the distraction. Then a blue car parked behind the truck, and a man stepped out. Emma couldn't help but notice him. He was tall with broad shoulders, dressed in jeans and a simple gray t-shirt. His light brown hair caught the morning sun. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and their eyes met across the lawn. He smiled and waved. Emma felt a sudden warmth in her cheeks. She waved back, surprised by her own reaction. It had been so long since she had felt that flutter in her stomach, that quick skip of her heart. The man walked over, stopping at the edge of her porch steps. "Hi there," he said, his voice deep and friendly. "I'm James Mitchell, your new neighbor." Emma stood and smoothed her dress. "Emma Thompson, welcome to Maple Street." James had kind eyes, she noticed, and laugh lines that suggested he smiled often. "It's nice to meet you, Emma," he said, and the way he said her name made it sound special somehow. They talked for a few minutes about the neighborhood. James was a landscape architect who had moved from the city for more space and quiet. His easy conversation and genuine interest in what she had to say made Emma realize how much she missed being truly heard. As James returned to his moving truck, Emma went back inside, surprised to find herself smiling. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of something new, something hopeful. She glanced at Daniel's note on the counter and felt a pang of sadness mixed with a new emotion she wasn't ready to name yet. Over the next week, Emma found herself looking out the window more often than usual. She would catch glimpses of James working in his yard, planting new flowers and shrubs that transformed the previously neglected garden. His strong hands worked the soil with care, and the way he moved with purpose and patience fascinated her. One Saturday morning, as Emma watered her own flowers, James appeared at the fence that separated their properties. "Good morning, Emma," he called, his smile bright in the morning sun. "Those roses are beautiful. You have a real talent." Emma felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. "Thank you," she replied, walking closer to the fence. "But I think you're the one with the talent. Your garden has come alive in just a week." James laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Well, it's my job, but also my passion. There's something magical about helping things grow." He paused, then added, "I'm making some iced tea. Would you like to come over and see what I've done with the backyard?" Emma hesitated, thinking of the empty house behind her. Daniel had left early again, with another note saying he would be home late. "I'd love to," she finally said. James's backyard was a work in progress, but Emma could see his vision taking shape. Stone pathways curved between newly planted flower beds, and a small fountain bubbled peacefully in one corner. They sat on his deck, drinking sweet tea and talking as the morning stretched into afternoon. Emma found herself sharing things she hadn't told anyone in a long time: her love for teaching, her dream of writing a novel someday, her childhood in a small coastal town. James listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was truly engaged in her stories. "What about you?" she asked, realizing they had talked mostly about her. "What brought you to landscape architecture?" James looked out at his half-finished garden. "I was going through a rough time after college. My father had just passed away, and I was lost. One day, I started working in his garden just to feel close to him again." His voice softened with the memory. "I found that working with plants, creating something beautiful from nothing, it healed something in me." Emma felt a connection growing between them, built on understanding and shared confidences. When she finally checked her watch, she was shocked to see it was nearly 4 o'clock. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "I need to start dinner." James walked her to the gate between their yards. "This was nice," he said, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. "We should do it again sometime." Back in her own kitchen, Emma moved about with a strange mix of emotions. She felt lighter somehow, energized by her conversation with James. But as she prepared a meal she knew would likely grow cold waiting for Daniel, a sadness settled over her as well. Daniel came home just after 10, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. Emma was curled up on the sofa with a book she hadn't really been reading. "Sorry I'm so late," he said, his voice tired. "The Carter case is taking everything I've got." He noticed the book in her hands. "Anything good?" Emma marked her place and set the book aside. "Just something to pass the time." She watched as he poured himself a glass of whiskey. "There's food in the fridge if you're hungry." Daniel nodded absently, his mind clearly still at the office. "Maybe later." He sat in the armchair across from her, not next to her on the sofa as he once would have. "How was your day?" Emma thought about her afternoon with James, the easy conversation, the way he had truly listened to her. "It was fine," she said. "I met our new neighbor." "Oh," Daniel said, taking a sip of his whiskey. "What are they like?" Emma corrected gently. "His name is James. He's a landscape architect." Daniel nodded, but his phone buzzed, drawing his attention away. Emma watched as he checked the message, his brow furrowing. "I need to respond to this," he said, already standing. "Don't wait up for me." Later, lying alone in their bed, Emma stared at the ceiling fan again. The house was quiet except for the distant sound of Daniel's keyboard from his home office. She thought about James and the comfort she had found in his company. It wasn't just that he was attractive, though he certainly was, but that he made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in a long time. Emma turned onto her side, pulling the covers around her. She told herself that it was natural to enjoy making the new friend, that there was nothing wrong with the warmth she felt in James's presence. But as she drifted toward sleep, Emma knew that the feelings stirring within her were becoming more complicated than simple friendship. The days grew warmer as spring deepened into summer. Emma and James fell into an easy routine. Most mornings, they would have coffee together on his deck or her porch before Emma left for school. On weekends, they worked in their gardens side by side, separated only by the low fence between their properties. Their conversations flowed naturally, filled with laughter and growing understanding. Emma tried not to notice how her heart raced when James rolled up his sleeves to work, revealing strong forearms tanned by the sun. She tried not to think about the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at her, or how his hand felt when it accidentally brushed against hers while passing garden tools. At home, Emma made one last attempt to reconnect with Daniel. She prepared his favorite meal one Friday evening, set the table with candles, and wore the blue dress he had once loved. She even left work early to make everything perfect. But at 7, Daniel called to say he would be working late again. "I'm sorry, Emma," he said, his voice distant through the phone. "This case is almost wrapped up. Things will be better soon." Emma blew out the candles and sat alone at the beautifully set table. The promises of soon had been coming for months now. She wrapped Daniel's dinner and put it in the refrigerator, then changed out of her dress into comfortable clothes. As darkness fell, Emma stepped outside for some fresh air. The sound of soft guitar music drifted from James's backyard. Without really deciding to, she found herself walking next door. James sat on his deck, softly strumming an acoustic guitar. A single lamp cast a warm glow around him. He looked up as Emma approached, his face brightening. "Hey there," he said, setting the guitar aside. "I didn't know you were home." "I wasn't supposed to be," Emma said, her voice catching slightly. "Daniel had to work late again." James studied her face, seeing the hurt she tried to hide. "Come sit," he said gently, patting the space beside him on the bench. "I'll play you something." Emma sat down, closer to James than she normally would have allowed herself. His warmth beside her was comforting in the cool evening air. James picked up his guitar again and began to play, his fingers moving skillfully over the strings. The melody was sweet and a little sad. "That's beautiful," Emma whispered when he finished. "Did you write it?" James nodded, his eyes meeting hers in the soft light. "It's new. I've been feeling inspired lately." A moment of understanding passed between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Emma knew she should leave, go back to her empty house, but she couldn't make herself move away from him. "Emma," James said softly, setting his guitar aside again. "I need to tell you something, but I don't want to complicate your life." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. "My life is already complicated," she said. James took a deep breath. "I think about you all the time. When you're not here, I look for you. When you are here, I can't take my eyes off you." His voice was low, honest. "I've never felt this way about anyone before." Emma closed her eyes, feeling tears threatening. "James, I'm married." "I know," he said quickly, "and I respect that. I would never ask you to." He trailed off, running a hand through his hair. "I just needed you to know how I feel. If you want me to back off, just say the word." Emma opened her eyes and looked at him. In that moment, she wanted nothing more than to lean forward and close the small distance between them. Instead, she stood up. "I should go." James nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course." But as Emma turned to leave, he caught her hand. The touch sent warmth spreading up her arm. "Emma," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever you decide, wherever this goes or doesn't go, I'm here. Not just as, whatever this is between us, but as your friend." Emma squeezed his hand, allowing herself that small contact. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. That night, Emma lay awake until Daniel came home just after midnight. He slipped into bed beside her, careful not to wake her, not knowing she was already awake. She could smell the office on him, coffee, paper, the faint scent of the cleaning products used by the night staff. Emma turned toward him in the darkness. "Daniel," she said softly. "Are you awake?" He shifted, surprised. "Yeah. Sorry if I woke you." "You didn't," she said. "Can we talk?" Daniel sighed, the sound heavy with exhaustion. "Can it wait until morning? I'm dead on my feet, Em." Emma felt the familiar ache of disappointment. "Sure," she said, turning away again. "In the morning." But in the morning, Daniel was gone before she woke, another note on his pillow. "Had to get an early start. We'll talk tonight." A week passed since James had confessed his feelings. Emma had kept some distance between them, confused by her own emotions. She still greeted him each morning, but their coffee meetings had stopped. She missed them, missed him, more than she wanted to admit. The promised talk with Daniel never happened. Each night he came home too late or too tired. Each morning he left before she woke. The gap between them widened with each passing day. On Friday afternoon, Emma arrived home from school to find a package on her doorstep. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal with a note. "For that novel you mentioned wanting to write. Sometimes it helps to put feelings into words. James. Emma traced her fingers over the smooth cover. The gift was thoughtful, personal, exactly what James had come to mean to her. She looked toward his house and saw him in his garden, pretending not to watch for her reaction. She walked over, journal in hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "This is perfect." James smiled, relief evident in his eyes. "I was worried you might think it was too forward." "No," Emma said. "It's the kindest gift I've received in a long time." James wiped his hands on his jeans. "I've missed our talks," he admitted. "Me too," Emma whispered. A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with unspoken words. Then James said, "I'm going to the lake tomorrow, just to sketch some landscape designs, get some fresh air." He hesitated. "Would you like to come? Just as friends?" Emma knew she should say no, but the thought of another lonely Saturday in her empty house made her heart ache. "I'd like that," she said. The next morning dawned clear and warm. Emma left a note for Daniel saying she'd gone out with a friend for the day. It wasn't a lie, she told herself, even as guilt gnawed at her. James drove them to a small lake about an hour from town. The water sparkled in the sunlight, surrounded by trees and wildflowers. They spread a blanket on a grassy spot near the shore. "It's beautiful here," Emma said, breathing in the fresh air. James nodded, opening his sketchbook. "I come here sometimes when I need to think. It's peaceful." They spent the morning in comfortable companionship. James sketched while Emma wrote in her new journal. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in silence, but always there was an awareness between them, a connection that grew stronger with each passing hour. They ate the lunch James had packed, sandwiches, fruit, and homemade cookies. Afterward, they walked along the shore, their hands occasionally brushing. "Tell me more about your novel," James said as they walked. Emma smiled, embarrassed. "It's just an idea, really. About a woman who wakes up one day and realizes she's been living someone else's life instead of her own." "And what does she do about it?" James asked. Emma looked out at the water. "I don't know yet. I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out." As the afternoon faded, they sat side by side on a fallen log, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. James turned to her, his face serious. "Emma, I want you to know that I meant what I said about being your friend. If that's all we ever are, I'm okay with that." Emma looked at him, at his kind eyes and gentle smile, and felt something shift inside her. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft, tentative, a question more than an answer. James remained perfectly still for a moment, then gently returned the pressure, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. The touch was electric, awakening parts of Emma that had been dormant for too long. When they pulled apart, Emma's heart was racing. "I shouldn't have done that," she whispered, even as her body hummed with the rightness of it. James touched her face gently. "Do you regret it?" Emma closed her eyes. "No," she admitted. "And that scares me." The drive home was quiet, both lost in thoughts of what had happened and what it meant. When James pulled up in front of her house, Emma saw that Daniel's car was still not in the driveway, another late night at the office. "Thank you for today," she said, her hand on the door handle. "I needed it more than I realized." James nodded, his eyes soft in the fading light. "Me too." Emma got out of the car and walked to her empty house, her lips still tingling from their kiss, her heart torn between guilt and a happiness she hadn't felt in years. Emma couldn't sleep that night. The memory of James's kiss played over and over in her mind, the softness of his lips, the gentle touch of his hand on her face. She felt alive in a way she hadn't for years. But when Daniel finally came home after midnight, the weight of guilt pressed down on her chest. Sunday passed in a fog. Daniel spent most of the day sleeping, exhausted from his work week. Emma avoided looking out the windows, afraid of seeing James and revealing everything in her eyes. By evening, she knew she had to make a decision. She couldn't continue living in this limbo. On Monday morning, Emma called in sick to school. She waited until Daniel left for work, then made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, trying to sort through her tangled emotions. A soft knock at the back door startled her. James stood there, concern written on his face. "I saw your car was still here," he said when she opened the door. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." Emma stepped back, allowing him to enter. "I'm not sure I am," she said honestly. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, coffee cups between them like a barrier. James watched her with patient eyes. "I can't stop thinking about you," Emma finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About us? About what happened at the lake?" James reached across the table, his fingers stopping just short of hers. "I can't either." "But I'm married, James," Emma said, the wedding ring on her finger suddenly feeling heavy. "I made vows." James nodded, his eyes sad but understanding. "I know. And I would never ask you to break them." He took a deep breath. "But I also see how unhappy you are, Emma. You deserve more than lonely nights and cold notes on a pillow." Tears filled Emma's eyes. "I've tried so hard to make things work with Daniel. I don't know what else to do." "Have you told him how you feel?" James asked gently. "Really told him?" Emma shook her head. "He's never around long enough to have a real conversation." "Then make him listen," James said, conviction in his voice. "You owe that to yourself. And to him." Emma knew he was right. No matter what happened between her and James, she needed closure with Daniel. "What about us?" she asked, finally allowing her fingers to touch his across the table. The contact sent warmth through her body, a rightness that was impossible to deny. James turned his hand, entwining their fingers. "I'll be here," he said simply, "whatever you decide." That evening, Emma prepared dinner, determined to finally have the conversation with Daniel that was long overdue. She was surprised when he came home earlier than usual, just after 7. "You cooked," he said, loosening his tie as he walked into the kitchen. "We need to talk, Daniel," Emma said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Daniel really looked at her for what felt like the first time in months. Something in her expression must have registered because he nodded and sat down at the table. Over dinner, Emma finally let out all the feelings she had been holding inside, her loneliness, her disappointment, her fear that they had become strangers living in the same house. Daniel listened, his face growing more troubled with each word. "I didn't realize," he said when she finished. "I've been so focused on this case, on making partner." He reached for her hand across the table. "I'm sorry, Emma. I never meant to shut you out." His touch felt familiar but different now. There was no spark, no warmth spreading up her arm the way it did when James touched her. "I'm not sure sorry is enough anymore," she said softly. Daniel's face paled. "What are you saying?" Emma took a deep breath. "I'm saying I don't know if we can fix this. I don't know if I want to try." "Is there someone else?" Daniel asked, his voice tight. Emma hesitated, torn between honesty and kindness. "This isn't about anyone else," she said finally. "This is about us. About what's been missing for a long time." Daniel looked down at their joined hands. "I know I've been absent. But I thought we were solid, Emma. I thought we could weather anything." "So did I," Emma said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "But I can't keep living like this, Daniel. I need more than empty promises and cold sheets." "Tell me what you need," Daniel said desperately. "I'll cut back my hours. We can go to counseling. Just don't give up on us yet." Emma looked into his pleading eyes and felt a wave of confusion wash over her. Part of her wanted to believe him, to try again with the man she had once loved so deeply, but another part, the part that came alive in James's presence, whispered that it was too late. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to think." Daniel nodded, his own eyes wet with tears. "Okay, time, I can give you that." 2 weeks passed. Daniel made visible efforts to be more present in their marriage. He came home earlier, asked about her day, and even suggested they see a marriage counselor. Emma agreed, though her heart remained confused. Their first session had been uncomfortable but honest, the counselor helping them articulate feelings that had been buried for too long. During this time, Emma maintained a careful distance from James. They still exchanged polite greetings, but she avoided being alone with him. James respected her space, though she often caught him watching her from his garden, his eyes filled with questions he didn't ask. One evening, after a particularly emotional counseling session, Daniel reached for Emma's hand as they drove home. "I've been thinking," he said, "we should get away this weekend, just the two of us. Like we used to." Emma looked at his hopeful face. "Where would we go?" "The cabin by the lake. Remember how we used to love it there?" Emma did remember. They had spent their honeymoon at that small cabin, young and in love, with nothing but time and each other. "That sounds nice," she said, trying to feel the enthusiasm her words suggested. The next day, as Emma packed for their trip, she noticed James working in his front yard. Before she could stop herself, she walked over to him. "Hi," she said simply. James straightened, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Hi yourself, it's good to see you." Emma nervously twisted her hands. "Daniel and I are going away for the weekend, to try to work on things." James's smile faltered slightly, but he nodded. "That's good, Emma. I hope it helps." "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Part of me wants to save my marriage. Daniel's really trying now, but part of you is here." James finished softly. "With me." Emma nodded, unable to deny it. "Is that terrible?" James stepped closer, careful not to touch her. "No, it's honest. And honesty is all I've ever asked from you." They stood in silence, the air between them heavy with unspoken feelings. Finally, James spoke again. "You need to go on this trip, Emma. You need to know for sure what you want, because if you choose me, if that's what you decide, I don't want there to be any doubts. No regrets." Emma looked into his eyes and saw the depth of his feelings for her. "What if I make the wrong choice?" "The only wrong choice is the one that doesn't make you happy," James said gently. "Whatever you decide, I want you to be happy, Emma, even if it's not with me." Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes. She wanted to throw herself into his arms, to feel that spark again. Instead, she nodded and turned away, walking back to her house where Daniel was waiting. The drive to the cabin was quiet, both of them lost in thought. Daniel made small talk about the scenery, about memories from previous trips. Emma responded, but her mind kept drifting to James. The cabin was just as she remembered, rustic and charming, nestled among tall pines with a view of the lake. Daniel carried their bags inside while Emma stood on the small porch, breathing in the scent of pine and water. "It's still beautiful," she said when Daniel joined her. He slipped his arm around her waist. "Remember our honeymoon? How we hardly left the bedroom." Emma nodded, leaning slightly away from his touch. "That feels like a lifetime ago." Inside, Daniel built a fire while Emma unpacked their food in the small kitchen. They made dinner together, moving around each other with the familiarity of years spent sharing the same space. After eating, they sat on the old sofa before the fire, a glass of wine in hand. "I've missed you," Daniel said, his voice soft in the firelit room. "Even when we were both at home, I missed you." Emma looked at him, seeing the man she had fallen in love with years ago. "I missed you too." Daniel leaned forward, setting his wine glass down. "Emma, I know I've been a terrible husband lately, but I want to fix this. I want us to find our way back to each other." He took her hands in his eyes earnest. "I love you. I've always loved you. Please give us another chance." Emma felt tears well up. She did love Daniel in a way. But was it enough? Was it the right kind of love to build a life on? She thought of James, of the electricity she felt at his touch, of the way he truly saw her. "I don't know if love is enough anymore," she whispered. Daniel's face fell, but he didn't let go of her hands. "Then tell me what else you need." "I'll do anything, Emma. Anything to make this work." As the fire crackled and night deepened around the small cabin, Emma faced the most difficult decision of her life: to rebuild what was broken or to risk everything for something new. The weekend at the cabin revealed much to Emma. She and Daniel talked for hours by the fire, sharing painful truths and long-buried feelings. They walked along the shore of the lake, holding hands tentatively as they discussed what had gone wrong and if it could be fixed. Daniel was more open than he had been in years, admitting his obsession with work had been partly fear of failing, fear of not being enough. By Sunday afternoon, as they packed to return home, Emma had made her decision. The drive back was quiet but not uncomfortable. There was a peace between them that had been missing for a long time. When they arrived home, Emma noticed James's car was gone. His house looked empty, the curtains drawn. A small ache formed in her chest at the thought that he might have left without saying goodbye. That evening, after she and Daniel had unpacked, Emma stepped out onto the back porch. The night was warm, stars visible above the trees. She thought about the weekend, about Daniel's efforts and promises. He had shown her glimpses of the man she had married, but something still felt missing. A movement in the darkness caught her eye. James stood at the edge of his property watching her. Her heart jumped at the sight of him. Without thinking, she walked across the lawn toward him. I thought you might have left, she said when she reached him. James shook his head. Just went to visit my sister for the weekend. I needed to clear my head. His eyes searched her face. How was your trip? Clarifying, Emma said softly. She took a deep breath. James, I need to tell you something. He nodded, his face serious in the moonlight. I'm listening. I care about Daniel. He's trying so hard now, and part of me wants to believe we can fix things. She paused, gathering courage. But when I'm with you, I feel something I've never felt before. Something I didn't even know was possible. James remained still, waiting for her to continue. The truth is, Emma whispered, I think I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me. James took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. What are you going to do? I told Daniel the truth tonight, about everything, about us. Emma's voice trembled. I told him I need to follow my heart, even though it means hurting him. Even though it means stepping into the unknown. James's breath caught. And what did he say? He was hurt. Angry. But also understanding in a way I didn't expect. Emma's eyes filled with tears. He said he'd sensed something had changed in me even before I met you. That we'd been drifting apart for longer than either of us wanted to admit. James reached out slowly, his fingers brushing a tear from her cheek. The touch sent warmth through her entire body. And now I'm taking a leap of faith, Emma said, moving closer to him. Daniel and I agreed to separate. He's staying with his brother for a while until we figure out next steps. James's arms came around her, pulling her gently to him. Emma, are you sure? I don't want you to regret this. Emma looked up at him, seeing all the possibilities of their future in his eyes. The only thing I regret is not finding out what this could be. What we could be. His lips met hers, soft and questioning at first, then with growing certainty. Emma felt the rightness of it down to her bones, the way she fit perfectly in his arms, the way her heart beat in time with his. When they finally pulled apart, James rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Emma. I think I've loved you since that first morning when you waved to me from your porch. I love you too, she whispered, the words feeling both foreign and perfectly natural on her lips. They stood together in the moonlight, at the edge of their properties and the beginning of something new. Emma knew there would be difficult days ahead, divorce papers to sign, explanations to give, judgments to face. But for the first time in years, she felt truly alive, truly herself. James took her hand, entwining their fingers. So what happens now? Emma smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. Now we take it one day at a time. Now we build something real, something honest. She squeezed his hand. Now we find out what it means to truly please each other in every way that matters. As they walked together toward his house, Emma felt no regret, only the certainty that sometimes the hardest choices led to the truest happiness. Sometimes the end of one story was simply the beginning of a better one.